Professor Sachs, I want to talk about probably the biggest threat I think is right now is a war in the Middle East. I mean, we've seen roughly 13 months after the brutal attack on Israel, October 7th last year, and this is a very interesting thing because I believe that the United States and Israel really are being isolated on the international stage. We see the United States can just undivided support for Israel no matter what. Biden has given multiple red lines to Netanyahu. I mean, Netanyahu has smashed through every red line and just seemingly doing whatever he wants. We've seen conflicts rise with Iran, Hezbollah. There is so much potential escalation here. How do you look at this conflict in the Middle East as of right now? And share us your thoughts.
Well, this is a conflict that goes back 100 years, actually 107 years. The British Empire made a statement that Palestine, after World War I, would become a homeland for the Jewish people. Of course, there was a Palestinian population there that wasn't asked.
Right.
Incidentally, in typical British fashion, the so-called Balfour Declaration was part of a massive duplicity in general because Britain promised the territory 3 times over. Once as a Jewish homeland, it promised it to the Sharifs of Hejaz that the Arabs would take over. For those of you who have seen Lawrence of Arabia, that wonderful movie from decades ago, right. That was that episode. The Arabs were promised, this will be your land. Well, that was duplicitous. And there was a third promise called the Sykes-Picot Treaty, where the British said that the British and the French will divide the land. Well, this meant that already a century ago, trouble started.
Right.
Whose land is this? In 1947, when the Palestinian population was roughly 2/3 of the population. The Jewish population at that point was roughly 1/3 of the population, which was way up from the start. The Jewish population was given a plan by the UN for having 56% of the land area, and the Arabs would get 44%. The Palestinians said, this is unfair. Why should we divide this? We have a majority. We should be an independent state.
Right.
There was a war over this issue. Israel declared its independence. It used terrorism to expel or drive out of fear hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who became refugees, and their children and grandchildren have continued to live as refugees, including in the Gaza Strip, which is where the current war has been most brutal. And this has been going on now for decades. The idea that there should be 2 states, of course, has been enunciated dozens of times in the United Nations. And after the 6-Day War, where Israel captured the remaining Palestinian land, it was immediately voted by the UN Security Council in UN Resolution 242 that that was occupied territory that must revert out of Israel's hands.
Right.
And the idea that there would be a Palestinian state on the borders of 1967, technically on the borders of the 4th of June, 1967, became a cornerstone of international law. Now, Israel has blocked that all along. Israel says, no, we're keeping everything. This is the root of this particular war,
right.
That Israel is saying, no compromise. We will rule over 8 million Palestinians, no problem. And that's why the regime has been called an apartheid regime. I think it's an appropriate label, right. Because Israel, especially Netanyahu, the prime minister, and his radical cabinet, say, no, this is ours. We keep it forever. International law says you're on occupied territory, and the International Court of Justice declared earlier this year Israel has to leave this territory within 1 year, actually. And the General Assembly of the UN, a few weeks afterwards, a couple months afterwards, voted to support the International Court of Justice ruling. Why do I mention all of this? Because the real solution to this war is a state of Palestine,
right.
Is a state of Palestine alongside a state of Israel. This will never come about through negotiations because Israel's dead set against it. They have everything. Why should they negotiate?
Right.
And they think that they have the United States wrapped around their little finger, that the U.S. does whatever they say. And up until now, the U.S. has done whatever they say. And what's very interesting that people in the United States should understand, Netanyahu has been probably the main cause of these disastrous wars that the United States has been in for the last 20 years. This is not well understood. And the reason is the following. Netanyahu's doctrine is, we keep everything. The Arab states don't like it. So we have to change those regimes until they like it. We have to overthrow Saddam Hussein. We have to overthrow Syrian Bashar al-Assad. We have to overthrow Libya's Muammar Gaddafi. We have to overthrow the Iranian government. That's literally his idea. It's crackpot in my mind. In other words, we do something that is intolerable. Others object. And if they object, we have to overthrow them. And you know what? The United States has been doing this for 20 years, playing Netanyahu's game. It's time to stop. This is no favor to American security. It's not even favor to Israel's security, for heaven's sake. Absolutely. Israel's getting more and more at fundamental risk. It's completely isolated internationally. It may well be decided by the International Court of Justice sometime soon that it's actually committing genocide, because that's the case that is now before it, brought by South Africa. That would be a completely shocking, wrenching decision, but it could well be arriving very, very soon. This radical idea of Netanyahu, we'll keep everything, no Palestinian state, and we overthrow anyone that doesn't agree with that, or not we get the United States to overthrow any government that doesn't agree with that. That's what we're seeing right now. This is crazy. This war could end again immediately. The United States would have to say, we vote for Palestine as the 194th UN member state, instead of vetoing that, which it did last spring in the UN Security Council.
Professor Sachs, how do you look at Israel's goal to eliminate Hamas? You know, they've said that that's Netanyahu's goal. We're going to destroy them. We're going to completely eliminate them. We're 13 months into that stated goal. How is it as of today, November 2024? Is that a completely unrealistic goal?
Well, it's completely unachievable. But note, if the statement were we're going to eliminate Hamas and then have a Palestinian state, well, then you could say there's a political solution to this. Right. But that's not what Israel's saying. Israel's saying we're going to eliminate Hamas and never have a Palestinian state. Right. That's the trick. They focus on Hamas, but they don't focus on the fact that they're blocking any path to peace. That's the real issue here.
Yeah, absolutely. What about when we look at it from the U.S. Congress and we look at the AIPAC and just how much the Israeli lobby funds the politicians? I mean, I think, as we both know, everyone knows it's a money game in Washington, D.C. You need tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to run these campaigns. Is it just, does Israel have us bought out? Are politicians bought out? Do they just hold too much control in Washington, D.C.?
Of course, AIPAC has bought out the Congress, but it's quite interesting, by the way. AIPAC spends maybe this year a few $100 million, and then it gets for Israel tens of billions of dollars, and then it causes the United States to go to war for trillions of dollars. In other words, one thing that I really don't like about our Congress is they sell themselves for nothing. In other words, they've sold American foreign policy for a pittance. AIPAC has the best deal in the world. They multiply their returns 100-fold, 1,000-fold. That's ridiculous. Okay, if AIPAC had to spend trillions of dollars to get trillions of dollars of U.S. spending, it wouldn't happen. Right. But they spend a small amount and they get the trillions. That's the game. It's remarkable. I just don't understand. These congressmen really set such a low price for selling American foreign policy.